Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning into the podcast, I welcome you and I hope that today's episode is one that will have you coming back for more. And if you're a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, as always, I welcome you back and hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and as always, insightful. So before we get into our main event, if you're on YouTube, please hit that red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on new episodes. And if you're listening from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, make sure you subscribe there as well. We also do accept any monetary donations for folks who want to help us build this platform that continues to grow. We're going on 5 years and we still have a ways to go, and we appreciate all the support people have given. So you can donate 4 different ways. You can go either on Cash App with the handle $ IDTALK4ED, Venmo using the handle @KwameSM, PayPal with the URL paypal.me/KwameSM. Or if you're a person who is a day one and has been rocking with Identity Talk from the beginning, you could become a patron today and have access to behind the scenes footage as well as some perks to show our token of appreciation for all that you've done to support this podcast. And to check out future and past episodes of the podcast, you can go to our main website at identitytalk4educators.com. And then for those who are looking to add some books to their 2025 reading list, please make sure you consider Learn to Relearn, Supporting Identity in a Culture-Affirming Classroom. It's been out for a couple of months, and this is 3 years in the making, y'all. And I couldn't be more thankful and appreciative of all the support that's been given to me and to folks who have already been engaging with the book and have been sharing reviews. It's been amazing and surreal. So please, thank you for everything. And if you would like to get a copy, you can get it on Routledge or Amazon, wherever you can purchase books. And then for those who have already read the book and you love what you've read, leave an official review on Amazon or Goodreads or any of the other platforms where you can review books. And then you can go to our main website at learntorelearn.com to learn more about the book. Thank you again. Now let's get to the main event. So I'm so excited about today's guest. I had a chance to really research her work, and her story is inspiring. The work that she does is inspiring and amazing. And honestly, it is an honor to have her on this platform. And we're going to get right into it. So we're going to welcome Sofia Gonzalez to the show to talk about her journey, her advocacy work in education, and everything in between. So let's bring Sofia on and we're going to get started. Hello.
Hey.
How we feeling?
I'm feeling good. Kwame, thank you for having me. It's going to be a good show.
I already know. I've been listening to your other past episodes on other podcasts. I'm like, oh, she coming with that smoke. I love it. That's what we love over here.
Let's
So
go.
I know it's gonna be more the same here. Um, and I know that you're currently just coming off of work after a long day at school. So tell me, how's the school year been for you so far? I know we're coming off the break.
Yeah, school year is going good so far. I mean, as you mentioned, coming off the break, something that's unique to our school building is we have a bit of a tech issue going on right now. Our internet has been on the ropes for several weeks now. So we, as teachers and staff and students, have needed to pivot and to circumnavigate this issue. And so it's been interesting taxing, but it's like, you know what? It's so indicative of the world of education. When issues arise, you have to ebb and flow, you have to pivot, you have to move forward to get the babies where they need to be.
Hey, that's what we do. That's what we do. We are all about adaptation. We know how to improvise and make the most out of every situation. That is what we do. So I know a little bit about you just from doing all this research. I know you're born and raised in Chicago, Chi-Town, the building, being a daughter of immigrants,
Mhm.
mom being from Puerto Rico and father being from Mexico. And you wear your identity very proudly. And I want to just give you a chance to share a little bit about your early upbringing and what ultimately led you to want to do this work that we love called education.
Yeah, thank you for those questions and thank you for those shout outs for sure. Chicago born, man. And, you know, it's a city that means so much to me. And I'll explain. Now I'm just outside in the Chi-Town area. But yeah, born and raised in the city of Chicago. And, you know, as you mentioned, a daughter of immigrants. My mother came from Puerto Rico when she was about maybe 6 or 7. And my dad came from Mexico when he was just a little bit younger. Both came not speaking the language. And even though the island is a commonwealth, as we are seeing and as we continue to see,
Yes.
there is definitely still some tension with colonization and similar immigration experiences for those of us that come to the States. And so, you know, early on, I was a writer, I was a poet, I was a singer, really involved in the arts, and that definitely plays a role as to what I do now, right? As a teacher and a speaker and a bit of a spoken word poet still. But it wasn't until I was in my early 20s where I cranked open into the world of nonprofit work. And I had always had like just a vibe with social activism, social justice, really servicing folks that are historically on the margins and just being a part of that whole dynamic. And so I started by running an after school program for at risk youth in the city of Chicago. And I would tutor them after school. I will pick them up in the bus, Kwame. Okay. I would take them back to our after school building and give them snacks and try to encourage them, try to help them finish their homework. And it was no easy feat, but it was there that I realized, man, I really love working with the youth. I really love empowering them. And also early on, I realized that I was able to work with, you know, youth that were at risk and youth that were experiencing a lot of challenges, and some of them were in crisis. And I realized early on that I was able to meet them, earn their trust, and really ebb and flow with them in a way that just came natural to me. And then after I ran that after school program, obviously I went to college, majored in English, thus becoming an English teacher. And I worked for another nonprofit that was a recipient of a grant that would allow us to go into schools both in the city of Chicago and in the suburbs and talk abstinence, relationships, dating, healthy decisions, even sexually transmitted diseases, pregnancy, like all these hot button topics, right, to teenagers. And it was there where I was like, whoa, I entered the classroom and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And around that time, too, I was also doing work for the local church. I was a youth leader. I would lead like youth groups and we would go on retreats. And like just the natural born leader in me began to emerge, kind of mixed with faith and with healthy choices and with empowering folks. But it was when I stepped into the classroom as a guest speaker, that's when I was like, yo, there's a vibe here, there's an energy here, there's a reciprocity of love and respect and joy. And that's when I knew, I'm like, let me pivot here and let me get certified. I think I want this permanently. And in my late 20s, that's when I headed down that journey of teacher certification. And I got my master's with the University of Phoenix online with my teacher certification. I even student taught at my former high school. And I started to hit the ground running from there.
Awesome. And as you're sharing about your work, I'm just thinking about just your heritage, your identity. And I mean, as I've already shared, Relearn, I had a whole chapter focused on Latinx perspective. So that actually gave me an opportunity to learn about the history of different communities within the Latinx diaspora. And hearing your story and knowing that your mom herself, you know, being a bilingual education professional who works with newcomers
That's right.
and the work that you do, I'm thinking about like the Young Lords. So you talk about Chi-Town. You got the Young Lords, the work that they did. I'm thinking about Dolores Huertas and so many other people. So these are all historical figures that represent where you come from. So I'm just wondering, how does your Mexerican heritage shape your overall development as an educator, but also in your advocacy work?
That is such an incredible question. And you're right. You have done your research, young man. Okay, let me tell
I don't
you.
play now. Come on now.
You
I don't
ain't
play.
playing because you like up my street, in the alley, in the garage. You are definitely speaking my language and you're definitely in my lane, right? And ultimately what I have discovered is my zone of genius, right? To operate in the centrality of your cultural identity.
That's right.
You know, early on, my parents, they unfortunately didn't teach me much Spanish in the home growing up. I was exposed to it. Both my parents are bilingual. And here's what I came to discover as I began to reclaim my language and reclaim my identity, my cultural identity, my roots, understanding the diaspora, understanding and coming to the realization that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. When
That's
I
right.
really began to like probe my mom, and I'm like, man, mommy, like, you know, I'm over here as an adult and like a little bit, you know, prior to that, really trying to reclaim my language and learning it later on in life. Like, why wasn't I really exposed to the language growing up? And she said this, Kwame, and I say this in a lot of my podcasts, either that I host or that I'm a guest on. And I'm even writing a book, and this is a snippet of it. She said, you know, when I came, because she was part of the Great Migration in the 40s, you know, on the island of Puerto Rico, there was a great migration in the 30s and the 40s, and a huge influx went either to two places: New York, that's where we get the New Yorkers and the Boricuas,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And Chicago,
Chicago.
which there's still a large Boricua population here. And the reason why we get the word Boricua, just a little bit of a history lesson for your listeners, okay? The island was once called Borinquen. And then once Ponce came, changed it to Richport, otherwise known as the affectionate Puerto Rico. And that's why islanders oftentimes were called Boricuas. It's a derivative from the original name of the island, Borinquen. I digress.
Wow.
Okay. And so
Wow.
my mommy was walking in her Chicago public school hallway at 8 years old with her friend. And she's a lot older now. And look into the impression and the impact that this one single encounter had on her linguistically. As she was speaking in Spanish with her classmates, a white teacher walked past, stopped both of them in their tracks. They must have been 7, 8 years old, so young. And she looked at both of them square in their eyes and she said, "We speak English here. We speak English here." And, you know, even with that aggression, right? And since then, and mommy would tell me, she's like, from that moment, Mija, when she told me that, I said to myself, I need to learn English and I need to learn it quickly. I need to learn it efficiently if I'm going to assimilate, right? and if I'm going to blend in and not get in any trouble. And that was the beginning of the erasure, follow me, of my language years later when I came into existence. And that is not uncommon for second generation individuals like myself. We have to deliberately and intentionally set journey and get ourselves on a path to reclaim our roots and reclaim our identity. And at the same time, mommy revealed this revelation to me. I was already like 10 years in the field of education. And I know you know a little bit about my story. I did my first 5 years teaching in a very rough neighborhood within a Chicago public school setting. Yeah. And it was a second chance charter. And it was mainly kids of color, primarily from the Latino community. I mean, the name of my school was called Latino Youth High School. Okay. And I was burying my students to gang into gun violence and losing them to the school to prison pipeline, and really seeing like some of our nation's most vulnerable students of color, Latino kids, really becoming just so marginalized and so impacted by the multiplicity of these systemic layers that would hinder any kind of upward mobility, even them standing a chance to graduate. And it was there where I was experiencing like a lot of burnout. I had developed post-traumatic stress disorder and compassion fatigue because I was so proximate to the issues. I'm getting to your cultural question, but I just wanted to build some context. I then began to get desperate for an affinity space. I needed an affinity space to see me, to affirm me, and to, amplify these gifts, and to, really give me permission, right, to operate from this Mexerican identity that I hold so near and dear, that I really lean into. I lead from it now, but I didn't before because no one had ever told me anything different. And so I came up on this organization called Latinos for Education, who I'm still very much involved with as an alum leader. And I entered their fellowship, Kwame, a few years back. And they said something to me that changed the trajectory of my entire path. They said, as I mentioned, Sofia, Ms. G, you really need to understand that you are your ancestors' wildest dreams, and you need to lead from your Latina identity. Therein shall be your power, your agency, your ancestral roots. And that is going to teleport you into another dimension of your work. I was like, you say what? Listen, even thinking about it, it like gasses me up. And it was so empowering. And from that moment on, I was like, yo, this is it. And I primarily now I serve, and I've always served students of color. I'm in a Title I school. Most of my students are first generation from Mexico. So forget it. It was on like Donkey Kong. I started disrupting the text. I started to like demystify any misconceptions that they had about language. I started ripping labels off of them. I started saying, listen, your second language is, if you are bilingual, you are at an asset, not a deficit. So really helping the kids unlearn, introducing them to some of their freedom fighters that they had never really learned about in depth, like Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, who I had personally met. I manifested that encounter. I met her last year, and I got receipts, Kwame, okay? I got my receipts. Si se puede. And it was such a, monumental moment for me to really tap into that. And now I travel the country in the name of language justice, in the name of racial justice, and really just leaning into this idea of using your cultural roots and your cultural identity to inform your teaching practices and pedagogy. Your listeners ain't ready for us. They ain't even ready for us right now. They ain't ready. Wow. They ain't ready. And
see, we only 20 minutes in. Look at where we going already. 20 minutes in, and we just scratched the surface.
Listen, the power that I was able to access, and I'll let you ask me another question because I could keep going with this. The power that I was able to access, the confidence, when people say, hey man, like folks like you and me, Ms. G, like We just got to ask for a seat at the table. I have come to the realization, the revelation, and the understanding that I am the damn table. I am the damn table. I am part of the global majority. Excuse me? No, I'm sorry. I'm not bringing a folding chair. I am the table, and I'm going to create spaces and places for folks not only to sit alongside me, but to come after me, leaving that door open. Don't play with me. It is all about my cultural identity, and I live and lead and speak and teach and preach from that space and place unapologetically.
The Identity Talk for Educators Live podcast is just one piece of the work that we do under Identity Talk Consulting, which we've had since 2019. And since then, we've had the privilege of working with 40 different schools, districts, and organizations across the globe. And we want to continue to add to that number in this new year. So if you are a school, if you're an educator or an organization that's looking to receive professional development and consulting services within any of our pillars, whether it's anti-bias, anti-racist practices, culturally responsive teaching, or identity affirming education, we are the firm for you, and we love to learn more about your needs. When you have a chance, make sure you go to our website at identitytalk4educators.com to learn more about our services and to schedule a discovery call today. We love to hear from you. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Where's the collection plate?
Somebody say amen, okay?
Amen. Oh, man. Listen, so I do want to get to that part for sure, but let's go back in time a little bit because I'm curious about what, what was life like for young Sophia going through K to 12? So now that we got some of the background story, I'm wondering, were there any challenges that you had in terms of being able to embrace your full identity? Because you mentioned the story about your mom saying that, hey, we got to learn English because that's going to be a navigational tool for you so you can assimilate into this culture. So I know that's part of it, but I'm wondering if there are some other things that came along that journey that you had to experience to get to where you are today.
That's such a great question. And I do have a point of reference for that. Living in the city and then my parents eventually moving us out of the city for a season. I just kept moving in and out, in and out. Born in Chicago, then went to the suburbs. Then my husband and I got married. Then I moved back into the city and now I'm just outside. But I can remember clearly a time when I was in a Chicago suburb and I believe I was in the second or the third grade. And I was one of the only Latinas on that playground. I remember this as clear as day. And I had who I thought were my friends. We were playing by the playground, and one of the young ladies proceeded to call me a racial slur. I will never forget. And I felt that it was wrong. I felt that it was negative, but I had never heard of this racial slur before. The term was spick. And I had never heard of that term before. I mean, I was so young. And this young lady, she was of Italian descent. And she proceeded then to slam my face in the slide. And I was like in shock. She's like, you, this and that, racial slurring, and just speaking really aggressively and negatively towards me. And I remember throwing sand in her face. Ooh. And she then proceeded a little bit later, getting her older sisters to intimidate me because they went to the same school, but they were a little bit older. And I remember years later, I never even told my mom. I didn't report this to anybody. I mean, I was so young, but I remember that instance so clearly as one of my earliest experiences with racism. And it was there where I felt almost afraid to bring my food to the lunch table, my rice and beans and my tostones. I opted out and I told mommy, like, I just want school lunch. And it was there where I began to kind of like suppress my cultural identity because that really had an impact on me. naturally so, right? I mean, those were impressionable years. But later on in life, as we're speaking right now, I realized that that was a seed that needed to be planted, because it would later on in life be that point of reference by which I would nurture, not for the sake of racism growing, but for the sake of nurturing this idea of anti-racism, because that seed of negativity and that negative impact was planted in my lived experiences growing up in my most formative years. That really then became like this fuel, like this point of reference by which I would nourish and foster the opposite with passion and with personal experience. So, to answer your question, that was something that was a challenge for me in my K through 12 experience. Just really dealing with, some racist comments and moments, and not really knowing how to navigate those early on.
Yeah, I can only imagine all that was going on during that time. And I would think all those moments that you had and everything that you went through during your life, that had to serve as a foundation for your nonprofit, Project 214. And I know there's a special story that's attached to that, which I'll let you share. But one thing that I noticed about 214, and I'm not sure if anybody has told you this, but what's the date for Valentine's Day?
Oh, I love that. No, February 14th.
So clearly, Project 214 is your labor of love. So you see how we did that right there?
Gosh, I see how you did that.
So I want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about the work you do with Project 214. Tell us how it originated and how that is being used as a vehicle to navigate this current climate that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, first of all, that was so awesome of you to make that connection of 214, February 14, that day of love. It's definitely my labor of love, and it's definitely something, a project that radiates love to those that need it. Yeah, man, Project 214 was born in honor of my first classroom number, room 214, where the magic, the chaos all began, as I had mentioned earlier in this Second Chance Charter. And it started very grassroots. It started just me responding to the needs of my students and families at the time. And as I had mentioned just a little bit, I had been involved in the local church, which in my 20s and my 30s, which was a huge part of my life. And I was on like the missionary side. I'm the wife of an ordained minister. Another fun fact about Miss G, that's where I get like the preacher teacher in me, right? um, all those sermons that I sat under. But at the time that Project 214 was born, I was doing international work with the local church that my husband was pastoring at the time. And we were in Central America. We were in El Salvador, which is where his family is from. And we were doing some social justice work and humanitarian work there. And some friends of mine at the time were like, yo, like, what you're doing with your kids in Chicago, like providing resources, providing peace circles, holding space for them. I was working with the Chicago Police Department as well. I'm just trying to bridge those gaps, and also a local nonprofit called Ceasefire that would go into these gang infested neighborhoods, find the sectional leaders and try to call a ceasefire, right? So I was holding space for that in my classroom. One of my good friends at the time was like, we need to like 501c3 this, and we also need to take this international too, because education is like a universal language. So as I was doing my mission work out in El Salvador, I was, preaching in the local church in Spanish. We were doing food drives, clothes drives. We kind of did like a pivot, and we started doing back to school parties and backpack drives. And I was doing messages in Spanish still, but it was in the name of education, right? And it was me encouraging the students internationally that they have promise, that they have potential, that they are worthy of a quality education, and that it can serve as a great equalizer for their future. And that's kind of like where Project 214 was born, like kind of nestled between the city of Chicago and some of my local church work. And then it went international. And then we found ourselves getting so many donations. We built our website, and you know how social media can really take you far. There were volunteers, board of directors. And then we started applying for grants, and we won a $10,000 grant with a nonprofit organization that actually awarded me in 2019 Teacher of the Year. And that was one of the honors of my life. And we applied for one of their grants called the Be More grant. And Project 214 won $10,000 in the name of our most successful campaign, which is called Her Turn, focusing on the gender equity gap. And we were able to both locally and globally back in 2020 through 2022 give scholarships to college age girls here in the States, and also send about 10 to 12 girls to school in a children's home that we sponsor in El Salvador with that $10,000 grant. But obviously with COVID, Project 214 started to kind of lose its stamina and lose its volunteer base. And just like many nonprofits, really took a hit. And so Project 214 has been kind of dormant. There's some restructuring going on. And I am proud to announce that I am connected to LULAC. I'm their current VP for Illinois Council 5238. LULAC, for those of your listeners who do not know who LULAC is the oldest standing Latino advocacy organization in the country. It's like our version of the NAACP, let's just say that. And LULAC is going to be collaborating with Project 214, taking it on as an initiative to continue to serve the Latino community and offer the support that Project 214 needs. So please wish 214 positive vibes. She is still alive, but just needs some support. And LULAC is willing to offer. And I'm so excited for this upcoming collaboration, because I'll tell you what, and I'm going to be real, like I didn't know if I needed to just put 214 to rest and just say, hey, you know, 214 was there for a season and provided backpacks and school supplies and empowerment and resources and featuring teachers and really working with folks on the margins and me traveling and speaking. Maybe that was just for a season. But, you know, for those of us who know, who are entrepreneurs and dreamers, and those who believe in the power of prayer and manifesting and visualizing, that you could pretty much keep any dream alive if you really work hard at it and really believe in it and continue to nourish it, give it love, and advocate for it. So that's what I've been doing, is advocating for the organization that is in need of just some folks to come around it. And I thank God for LULAC. We have our upcoming collaboration, our collab, that's going to be up and running very soon, so that we can continue. First and foremost, we're going to start by giving scholarships, because that's what LULAC does naturally and organically. They give scholarships to the Latinx youth. And that's what Project 214 does as well. So it's a perfect marriage. And I'm just excited that 214 can live on at whatever capacity. And I'm going to try to keep moving forward with whatever resources and networks.
Hi friends, it's me, Thaddeus from Thaddeus Nature Notebook. Are you loving our journey into the wild and learning all about awesome animals? Then don't forget to subscribe. You can find Thaddeus Nature Notebook on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Just hit that subscribe button and never miss a new episode. And if you're on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and leave a comment about your favorite animal. Thanks for listening and exploring nature with me. Let's keep discovering together. Now back to my daddy's self.
I have.
Oh, that's amazing. And you're just sitting here just rattling off all these things that you're doing. I'm like, dang, you do a lot. My goodness.
A A
little bit, right? You out here doing spoken word, facilitating power boxing classes, you
That's right.
podcasting, you preaching the word to people, you're teaching full time.
I am.
I mean, tell me what's the source of that creativity?
Mm.
It has to draw from somewhere, because not everybody has this boundless energy that allows them to do all these different endeavors. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, man. It's definitely born from some of my best practices, that what I call rhythms and flows that I engage in. Man, it's been probably a little bit more than 20 years that I've engaged in some of these best practices, where every morning I get up and I get my coffee and I sit in my favorite spot and I meditate, I manifest, I visualize, I pray, I innovate, I curate, I create. And I'm very intentional about getting in touch both with my creative self, my spiritual self, and my authentic self. And I really prioritize that. And that's where all of my creativity is housed, is what I've discovered. Just sitting in that stillness, waiting for the downloads, catching the revelations, speaking stuff out loud. I even speak out loud to myself, and writing stuff down, recording stuff, catching stuff. And I also read. I'm a very avid reader. I go from book to book to book to book to book to book. And so really just inundating myself in this constant search and journey to learn, to grow, to develop, to become inspired, to spur myself on. And that's where it comes from. And then also knowing when to rest, right? This idea, rest is also a form of radical resistance. And so really just kind of ebbing and flowing in that. And you do mention power boxing. I am a bit of a fitness junkie. I do spend a lot of time at the gym, and that also has been healing for me. I'm just very intentional about my stillness, about my meditation, about my healing. And about moving the body. And a few years back, I found power boxing at the local gym that I'm a part of. It's a women's gym, by the way.
Nice.
And I fell in love with power boxing because I have a lot of energy. If you can't tell, I mean, look it. People are like, man, I can feel you over the screen. I can't imagine you in person. I'm like, you can't even imagine. And I am barely 5'2", baby, but I pack a punch, okay? And I fell in love with power boxing, long story short. And my boxing trainer arrived in my life at a very critical moment where I was going through some real personal and even like professional challenges. And she really had an impact on me. I lost so much weight and I gained so much clarity, and I found a passion. Unfortunately, she died a few years ago of cancer. And I kept bothering my gym manager. I said, hey man, when is boxing coming back? Like, yo, like that was my class, like that was my jam. And she's like, we'll see. We're just waiting on someone that's certified. It's a specific class that we offer, and you need certification. No one here is really certified. I kept asking and asking until one day she said, why don't you do it? And I said, what? Me? I'm just a member here. And she's like, you're committed, you're passionate. And you know what, Sophia? Sometimes we're the ones that we're waiting for. And I'm like, so would you believe that Miss G went ahead and got boxing certified? And now that is another form, to your point, of my creativity. And I empower women. I create all my classes that are a mix of functional training, of strength training, of boxing fundamentals, and like crazy head to toe cardio. Like I am in your face. I go by Coach G. Don't play with me. And it is such an intersection of so many of my gifts, where I'm teaching, where I'm leading, where I'm facilitating, and I'm giving them the fundamentals of boxing. We're in boxing gear, and I'm just empowering these girls. I'm like, you are stronger than you know. This is all in the mind. You got to push in and out the ring. Like, I'm preaching, and they're in a class, and they're over here punching bags. Like, why do I want to cry? And like, I'm like, because this is more than a class, and I want to be more than just an instructor. And so, long answer to your question, but I'm very intentional about really sitting and really thinking about ways to serve in the many platforms that I have been blessed, severely and audaciously blessed to receive. And I hold them very dear, and I'm very intentional about the creation, the innovation, and the curation of these spaces to really move people to change.
And one of the things that you and I have in common is that we've taught in some of the roughest neighborhoods. I know in my case, I've primarily taught in Black and Latinx neighborhoods throughout my career, Title I schools.
Yeah.
And we have students who come to us from dire situations,
That's
whether
right.
it's within their families, within their neighborhoods. They're engaged in so many different things within those spaces, whether we're talking gangs, whether we're talking drugs, other vices. There's so much.
Yeah.
And this is segueing into your theme, because you talk a lot about trauma and how it can lead to transformation. And I want to get to that because I know for you, you've had students who have transitioned for different reasons, and they've been the crossfires of some of the things I just mentioned. And I've never had a student pass away or lose their life while I was actively teaching. Like, I've never had to experience that in all my years of teaching. But for you to have had to experience it, not once, but many other occasions, I just have to wonder, how do you continue to turn that pain into power and continue to do the work that you do in the community? Because that's a lot to have to carry in your heart, your soul. So yeah, tell me about that. No, it's a lot.
Yeah, man. And, again, you sure have done your research. That has become a bit of a niche for me. Last year I took a leave of absence to pursue a professional opportunity that unfortunately fell through. And I created a national speaking tour for myself, which I think is where you kind of came up on me on these social media platforms, as I shared some of my tour and some of my conferences and some of these national conversations that I was having with folks. And I kind of really found myself in the centrality of this message, and it became kind of like naturally and organically like this rally cry. We talk a lot about trauma-informed practices for the students, and you and I, we are team students all day.
That's right.
To your point, I did several years on the south side of Chicago, Englewood, for those who are listening in and know about Chicago neighborhoods. That was otherwise known as the murder capital of Chicago, where I was immersed for several school years into the Black culture, which for me was one of the most informative and provocative set of school years that I constantly refer back to. The Black diaspora and the Black culture, my goodness, is rich and robust, and there's so many intersections between the Latino experience and the Black experience. Not identical, but there's some struggles that kind of talk to each other, and I've always had this fascination. I digress on that, but as you stated, year after year, it's year 16 for me, and I lose a student either every year or every other year, it seems, to gang or to gun violence. And I really had to make a decision because, as I have mentioned, lots of information on trauma-informed practices for students. But what I really came to discover was not a lot of information, support, or resources were available for trauma-informed practices for the practitioner, for the teacher, for the advocate, for the activist, for the freedom fighter, for the one who is proximate to these issues, so close. Kwame, you got blood on your shirt. You got tears in your eyes. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you have funeral pamphlets in your teacher bag. Like, come on now. And so when we experience these traumatic experiences and events as the practitioner, as the advocate, as the teacher, where do we go? And for those of us who have agreed, all right, I get teary-eyed, misty-eyed, just even talking about it sometimes. For those of us who have agreed to sign up for these tough teaching assignments, right? For these tough assignments that perhaps heaven has endowed on us, where do we go to sustain the work? Man, if I'm a freedom fighter ready to just be my ancestors' wildest dreams, where do I go for that healing? Where do I go for that liberation? Where do I go for somebody to affirm me and say, I see you, I'm with you, and I am going to be walking and rocking with you as you engage your work, because you're that important. Oxygen mask first. So that's when I said, let me start putting some of my creativity, some of my poetry, some of my innovation, and some of my passion towards this as a national conversation. Let me enter this narrative and let me crank up this volume, because I also come in the name of urban education, and I also come in the name of the Title I educator. And I don't think that we get a lot of airtime. I don't think that we get a lot of, seats and spaces and, in these high up places. And that was another thing that I wanted to do. I wanted to change the narrative, right? We get this narrative that our kids in these marginalized environments, like, they're a certain kind of way, and they can only perform so much, and they can only achieve so far. And I also want to change that narrative, because that is part of the trauma that myself and my students have had to circumnavigate. I argue that there are so many systems in place and the layers, as I mentioned earlier, that would prevent many of our nation's kids from moving up. See, it's not an achievement gap as much as it is an opportunity gap. I'm going to keep preaching on that, so I got to really get to your question. And so in my pain, my signature keynote right now, from trauma to transformation, this is our call to action. Do you know where that was born from? After my last student funeral with my student, her name was Ruby. She died it was a drive-by shooting. She was at a party, 15 years old, and wrong place, wrong time. And she was gone in an instant. And that one was a real big one for me, because it's kind of like, if you are constantly confronted with the same or similar issues, then maybe that's the issue that you need to do something about. And that's where my signature keynote was born, from trauma to transformation. And so then I began to set foot on this journey and this assignment that I felt like I responded to become this wounded healer, and to travel the country with the lived experiences of myself and my students who are proximate to these issues, but how we're resilient, how we're overcomers, how we're brilliant, how we operate in our Black and brown brilliance, and how your brain, and I will say this, and I'm going to throw this out there, because one of the secrets to my sauce is speaking that which you seek, right? And saying it out loud and writing it on mirrors. I will be on the TED stage with this message very soon. I will be on the TED stage with this message. Do you come in with me?
We got to manifest that for sure. This has to be on the TED stage.
It has to be on the TED stage, because guess what? As I have delved deeper, and this is also my book idea, because I'm writing a book on this, your brain will support from trauma to transformation through neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. The hormones in your body will support your active engagement into living a life of service as a result of your trauma, through the release of endorphins, happy hormones like epinephrine and oxytocin. And some of our nations and world's and history books' most prolific freedom fighters have indeed chose to transform their trauma into transformative change, aka Nelson Mandela, the late John Lewis, who got into so much good trouble. We're still trying to unravel all of his good works. Malala Yousafzai, shot by the Taliban, and now she's leading the charge for girls' education. Come on now. And these are the principles, right? You can feel it, right? I know God has had me. I realize this, and I'm just on mission to heal as many freedom fighters as possible as I heal my own wounds that remind me of where I am and where I've come from. And I end with this, as you give me probably another question or two as we wrap things up. My first funeral was in 2012, where I lost my first student, and I met his mom in the parking lot. And this is a very monumental story for me that I continue to share, because it's definitely a point of reference for me that is really at the epicenter of all my advocacy work. And we exchanged some words, and I said something to her that became, Kwame, like my thesis statement and my North Star. I said, I'm going to do something about this in the name of your son. I don't know with who, I don't know where, and I don't know with what, but I promise I'm going to use my classroom, my heart, these hands for change. And it's been over a decade, Kwame, and I have not broken my promise. And so it's these stories, right, that I will continue to tell, because this cannot be normalized. And I will be sure to amplify those ideas.
All right. Well, wow. It's a lot. That's a lot.
It is a lot. And I will never not become desensitized. So your girl is always going to be crying at that, because it's just so close to the heart, and I guess where it should be.
Yeah, for sure. So as we start to wrap up, I do have a couple more. So when I think about teaching, for most of us, usually in the beginning of our careers, we have two tracks. So in my case, there's Mr. Sarfo-Mensah in the classroom. Outside the classroom is Kwame. For you, Ms. G, Sofia. And usually in the beginning, this is how those paths are traveling. But at some point, once we get self-actualization, they intertwine, they intersect at some point in that journey. So I'm wondering, given your journey that's still ongoing, when did you see those two personas become one?
You know, you say Mrs. G, and that does something to me. And, you know, I even made a t-shirt, my last keynote that I did over the summer when I was in Denver with the National State Teachers of the Year. That's the shirt I wore, Mrs. G. I promise you, I personalized my own shirt on that stage because I'm so serious. Because to your point, man, like our teacher and our advocacy, you know, name and our birth name, right? There is this incredible duality. And I think that I realized that Mrs. G and Sofia kind of became like one and the same once I realized about 5 years into my teaching career that I needed to become more than just a teacher, right? In that second chance charter. And I knew, and I'll tell you what, I'll get specific. And here are the details that I am committed to saying. And they are very graphic. It was over my first student's casket. This young man that I met his mother in the parking lot. That's when I knew that Sofia and Mrs. G, they became one and the same. I looked at him in the casket and my eyes scrolled up and I saw this beautiful stained glass and I saw this image of Christ, and I felt this premonition within me in front of the casket of my deceased student, 17-year-old boy in a white t-shirt, jeans, and Jordans. You know, you have to do something about this, right? You know, you've got to do something about this. That's when I knew, whoo, I am more than a teacher on record here. I am more than a teacher on record here. And it was there where I have, where I had that moment, I had that revelation. And there are moments where I do have to turn down the volume of Miss G / Sophia, because I am pretty intense and I am a very passionate individual. But I'm also a mom, right? I have 2 children. We were talking about it in the green room. I'm a proud mom of a 10-year-old who's a dual language student. She's learning English and Spanish in her classroom. I have an 18-year-old son who we just graduated from our district. I was both volunteering for the graduation and also his mama bear at the same time. And
Nice.
but to your beautiful question, this persona, this dual identity of Sophia and Miss G, I hold so dear and near to my heart, to my soul, to my spirit. And I tell my students, I tell folks that I meet from around the country. And now I tell you, Kwame, on your podcast, I am Mrs. G for life for you. You will always have me as a friend. You will always have me as a thought partner. You will always have me as a fellow freedom fighter in this fight for justice.
Ooh, what a great way to wrap things up. And then this is like the final one for sure. How do you stay true to the teacher in you?
Yeah, man. As I stated, by staying true to my best practices, my rhythms and flows that would continue to inspire me, heal me, and provide me the rest that I need, to continue to advocate when I need the help, and when I need folks to lean on, and just the continuation and the seeking out of these affinity spaces, fellowship spaces, networks, and organizations that would foster love, healing, liberation, and growth for me as the practitioner, as the advocate, as the vessel to bring healing, hope, and liberation to the world of education and beyond. This is how I stay true, man, all day.
There it is, y'all. Sophia, this has been an amazing conversation. Whew, from beginning to end. Easily one of my favorite conversations I've had in a while.
Oh, thank you. Same, friend.
And I have amazing guests come here, but you just brought something today that just really, really hit me. Like, I will sleep real well tonight. I know that for a fact. So
Amen.
thank you. Thank you. And please, please, please let people know how they can learn more about Sophia Speaks. How can they connect with you on social media and support all the work you're doing?
Yes, thank you so much, Kwame. So you could find me. I'm on IG at Sophia Speaks _ Sophia Speaks. I'm on Twitter X with the same handle at _ Sophia Speaks. And I'm on LinkedIn, Sofia Gonzalez, MEDMA. And I also have a website, sophiaspeaks.com.
And all that will be in the episode notes. So make sure y'all check those when you're watching or listening to this episode. And we're going to end it right here. Thank you all for coming on for another episode of IDTALK4ED Educators Live. And on behalf of Sophia, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. We're going to do this again another time. Peace out, y'all.
Amor y paz.